We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and today we have decided to delve deep into the cult of Serapis Christus, the Brotherhood of the Serapis Christus, the king, ex-lieutenant of Alexander the Great's army, who forced his way onto the throne and became the king, and then said, right, create a statue in honour of me, which was sort of Jim Morrison looking, with a pot on his head. And he named this cult Serapis Christus because the Greeks, when they invaded Egypt, created Alexandria, if they created it, wanted to be everything like the Egyptians, but the only thing they couldn't be apparently was black. So they got really angry, and they said, right, okay, we want a temple where you worship on the left of us, you worship your god, whatever, and we're on the right. And the Egyptians apparently said, no, we're not doing that, all this stuff. So this Ptolemy ordered all these temples, Egyptian temples, and the scrolls and that, burnt, shut down, and built his temples on top of temples on top of temples on top of temples, and all this historical stuff. He's supposedly a divine person who neglected his duties, because apparently, according to Tacitus, we've read, he healed a withered hand and all this sort of stuff. He's hearing the story second hand, so he's not saying, yeah, it's definitely true. He's just heard it from many sources. So this cult is still active in about 134 AD, because a guy called Silvanus, a friend of Hadrian, sent a letter to him saying, yeah, this cult is up and running, it's still active, all this sort of stuff, this Brotherhood of Serapis Christus. So we're looking into this book. We've missed out all the beginning fluff, and we've got straight to the meat and potatoes. Section 2, Christian period, the rule of Rome, BC 30 to AD 313. And it reads, Octavian, okay, this book is by Edward Morgan Forster, was born 1879, died 1970. And we're at section 2, Christian period, the rule of Rome, BC 30 to AD 313. Octavian Augustus, the founder of the Roman Empire, so disliked Alexandria that after his triumph over Cleopatra, he founded a town near modern Ramleh, Nicopolis, the city of victory. He also forbade any Roman of the governing classes to enter Egypt without his permission, on the ground that the religious orgies, big sex parties, there would corrupt their morals. The true reason was economic. That's the real reason. He wanted to keep the Egyptian corn supply in his own hands, and thus control the hungry populace of Rome, because he who controls the food controls the people. Egypt, unlike the other Roman provinces, became a private appanage of the emperor. So that was his private estate. Nobody could go there without his permission. Right? Obviously, you give permission to people to be populated, but he had his reserves. So it was a private appanage of the emperor, who himself appointed the prefect who governed it, and Alexandria turned into a vast imperial granary where the tribute collected in kind from the cultivators, those are people who planted the seed, tended to it, harvested it and stored it, and then he'd come along with a ship, and transshipment was made to his granaries for him, right, to control the people, lock it up, control the people. You're there starving, he says, right, you do this, you do that, and here's a bowl of grain or something. So it was an age of exploitation. Octavian posed locally as the divine successor of the Ptolemies, and appears among hieroglyphs at Dendria and Philly, but he had no local interest at heart in regards to Alexander. He didn't care. Probably just, I want that, I'll take that, I'll own that, etc, etc. A bit like Augustus with the granary. After his death, things improved. The harsh, ungenerous republic that he had typified passed into imperial Rome, who, despite their moment of madness, it all started claiming they were divine, they were gods, because the Roman senators were putting up this decree or this law, you are gods, so you have to take on a title of God, you have to become divine, act divine, tell everyone you're divine, and they put up these busts or heads of these particular Caesars. Anyone that walked past, they like Jews or Christians who didn't bow down to it, they were persecuted, right? Because they had to do it by law, even though they rebelled. After his death, things improved. The harsh, ungenerous republic that he had typified, Octavian, passed into Imperial Rome, who, despite the motives of madness, brought happiness to the Mediterranean world for 200 years. Alexandria had her share of this happiness. Her new problem, riots between Greeks and Jews, were solved at the expense of the latter. So, like, the Jews were shipped there, or taken there, or welcomed there to translate their scriptures into Greek for the Greek audience, Christians, etc. Right, and that became the LXX or Septuagint, which you have today, but it's a modern Americanized English translation of that supposed original. So they say. Yeah, her new problem, riots between Greeks and Jews, was solved at the expense of the latter. She gained fresh trade by the improved connections with India. Trajan, AD 115, recut the Red Sea Canal. She was visited by a series of appreciative emperors on their way to the antiquities of Upper Egypt. In about AD 250, she, with the rest of the empire, re-entered trouble. The human race, as if not designed to enjoy happiness, had slipped into a mood of envy and discontent. Barbarians attacked the frontiers of the empire, the Roman Empire, while within were revolts and mutinies. The difficulties of the emperors were complicated by a religious problem. They were there, they saw the Egyptian religion, the cult, Osiris, Serapis, etc., and they wanted to be all Egyptian, like most white rappers and singers try to do today. They copy their style, right? And then they get named in 2014 Black Artist of the Year when they're actually white. But that sort of stuff. But they got upset because they couldn't be one thing, and it was black, to be exactly like them, right? So they plagiarized their ideas, taken back to Athens. The Athenian politicians, priests, philosophers would say, no, don't bring that here. We don't want that. We've got our own philosophy. We want to keep it that way. So they'll excommunicate them, expose them, get out, give them expulsion, get out, or kill them, right? They didn't want that change. And but these people were saying, oh yeah, we invented this and that, when they actually stole it, plagiarized it from Egypt. But many people on the Sarnet, the TV, African Americans, into this Egyptian thing, they say, oh yeah, Christianity stole it, stole it from the Egyptians and all this sort of stuff. But they don't realise the mistake they've made. That these people, these converts, Greeks, Romans, etc., were of that Roman pagan form of Christianity under these emperors, etc. Whereas the 12 disciples of Christ, who were Galilean, Aramaic, or Galilean fishermen, who spoke Galilean, as Christ did, said, no, that's pagan. We're not taking that loan word from the Greeks that the Romans are using for our title, because it means slaves to the Christos, right? We are in a sense, but we're really servants, right? We're not slaves, thrown outside and live in the dirt, all that sort of stuff, and being mistreated. Okay, we don't take on that name because that's from pagan Rome, right? We don't like them, don't want nothing to do with them, right? So we, from our language, are going to use the name Msheekai, which means followers of the Messiah. Okay, so they never ever used Christians, even though it was supposedly introduced by Saint Mark and all this sort of stuff. All that sort of stuff. But that could be hearsay. Okay, so in about AD 250, she, with the rest, this is about India, with the rest of the empire, re-entered trouble. The human race, as if not designed and discontent, not designed to enjoy happiness, had slipped into a mood of envy and discontent. Barbarians attacked the frontiers of the Roman Empire, the Huns, etc. Too many orgies and they get weak, right? Squabbling amongst each other. While within were revolts, within Rome were revolts and mutinies. The difficulties of the emperors were complicated by a religious problem. They had, for political reasons, been emphasizing their own divinity, a divinity that Egypt herself had taught them, supposedly. It seemed to them that it would be a binding force against savagery and schism. They therefore directed that everyone should worship them. Who could have expected a protest from Alexandria? And there's some information here you can look at. The Christian community. According to the tradition of the Egyptian church, or the Coptic church, Christianity was introduced into Alexandria by Saint Mark, possibly one of the disciples, who in AD 45 converted a Jewish shoemaker named Ananias, and who in 62 was martyred for protesting against the worship of Serapis Christus. There is no means of checking this tradition. The origins of the movement were unfashionable and obscure, and the authorities took little notice of it until it disobeyed their regulations. So, as we said, the Roman Senate created this decree or this law that everyone should worship that emperor because he was divine, and they told him, you got to take on this divineship. You're a god, or this sort of stuff. It was all to control the people, right? And if you didn't bow down to their statue or pay homage, they'd execute you and have a lot of poo. Its doctrines were confounded partly with the Judaism from which they had sprung, partly with the other creeds of the city. A letter ascribed to the Emperor Hadrian in Alexandria, 134, says, "Those who worship Serapis are Christians." Okay, so you've got Jews, etc., that probably wouldn't worship it. Believers in the Christ that probably wouldn't worship it. They knew better, right? So they faced those persecutions, hassles, whatever. So those who call themselves bishops of Christ are devoted to Serapis. Those who worship Serapis are Christians, and those who call themselves bishops of Christ are devoted to Serapis. That's why it was called the Brotherhood of Christus, Serapis Christus, showing how indistinct was the impression that the successors of Saint Mark had made. The letter continues, "As a race of men they are seditious, vain and spiteful, as a body, or a total unit, wealthy and prosperous, of whom nobody lives in idleness." They were doing something to make money, whatever, right? Some blow glass, some make paper, and others linen. Their one God is nothing peculiar. Christians, Jews, and all nations worship him. And this Sylvanus states he wished this body of men was better behaved, more holy, Christ-like, probably, right? Instead of being a bunch of jerks. The community was organised under its overseer or bishop, who soon took the title of patriarch, and appointed bishops elsewhere in Egypt. The earliest centres were the oratory of St. Mark, which stood by the seashore, probably in the east of Sicily, and was afterwards enlarged into a cathedral. 2, a later cathedral church dedicated, 285, by the patriarch Theonas to the Virgin Mary. It was on the site of the present Franciscan church by the docks. 3, theological college, the catechetical school, founded about 200, where Clement of Alexandria and Oregon taught, site unknown. It was its bad behaviour, to use Hadrian's term, that brought the community, okay, so because they're naughty, the vicious and all this sort of stuff, to use Hadrian's terms, that brought the community into notice, brought attention to them, right? That is to say, its refusal to worship the emperors. So they were following the Serapis Christus, God, divine being, this cult, etc., instead of worshipping, paying homage, etc., to the current Roman emperors. To the absurd spiritual claims of the state, the Roman state, Christianity opposed the claims of the individual conscience. So this is the branch of these who branched out and followed something different in Alexandria, etc. And the conflict was only allayed by the state itself becoming Christian. The conflict came to its height in Alexandria, which, more than any other city in the empire, they may claim to have won the battle for the new religion. Persecution, at first desultory, grew under Decius, and culminated in the desperate measures of Diocletian. He was a nasty being, that one. 303, demolition of churches. All Christian officials degraded all Christian non-officials enslaved. Apparently, in the book of Tacitus, Histories, was Annals, Tacitus writes that Nero, as sick as he was, he just had to turn his head. He couldn't look at what Diocletian did. Was it Domitian? One of those two. He was just so sick. He just had to turn his eyes. Apparently, we have that book somewhere. So it was either Domitian or Diocletian. And so demolition of churches, all Christian officials degraded, all Christian non-officials enslaved. Diocletian, an able ruler, the great column miscalled Pompey's is, his memorial, did not persecute from personal spite. So it probably was him in the book of Annals of Attis. But the results were no less appalling and definitely discredited the pagan state. While we need not accept the Egyptian church's estimate of 144,000 martyrs in 9 years, it sounds very familiar to the 144,000 that were pure, etc. in the book of Revelations. There is no doubt that numbers perished in all ranks of society. Among the victims was Saint Minas, a young Egyptian soldier who became patron of the desert west of Lake Marialt, where a great church was built over his grave. Saint Catherine of Alexandria is also said to have died under Diocletian, but it is improbable that she ever lived. She and her world were creations of Western Catholicism. So, yeah, she might not have existed at all, but there's a church in her honour. She's a saint with this sister. In the land of her supposed sufferings is only recognised her out of politeness to the French. The persecution was vain, the state was defeated, and the Egyptian church, justly triumphant, dates its chronology not from the birth of Christ, but from the era of martyrs, AD 284. A few years later, the Emperor Constantine made Christianity official, because they'd been persecuted and it was illegal and this sort of stuff. And the menace from without came to an end. Okay, so those that went to Alexandria and persecuted these Christians because they didn't pay homage to the emperor, worshipped them, all that sort of stuff, was over with Constantine. Has up the top here certificate of having worshipped the gods, Museum Room 6, and then we're going to jump to page 39 in a minute. But we just noticed this here, Arius and Athanasius, 4th century AD. It was natural that Alexandria, who had suffered so much for Christianity, should share in its triumph, and as soon as universal toleration was proclaimed, her star re-emerged. She became popular, right? Rome, as the stronghold of paganism, was discredited, and it seemed that the city by the Nile, Alexandria, might again become imperial, as in the days of Antony, right? Remember Mark Antony, and Cleopatra? That hope was dashed. For Constantine, a very cautious man, thought it safer to found a new capital on the Bosphorus, where no memories from the past could intrude. But Alexandria was the capital spiritually, and because they had a massive library and all that sort of stuff, right? At least it seemed that she, who had helped to free imprisoned Christendom, would lead it in harmony and peace to its home at the feet of God. That hope was dashed too. An age of hatred and misery was approaching. The Christians, as soon as they had captured the machinery of the pagan state, turned it against one another, and the century resounds to a dispute between two dictatorial clergymen. Because these Christians were pillaging, looting, burning, knocking, smashing statues in the temple of Diana and all that sort of stuff, and it offended many of the Roman authorities who pushed for them to be persecuted, but they said, no, just leave them alone. They're doing their thing, we're doing our thing. But they kept pushing until it became a decree, and they got persecuted for not doing the same bull sacrifices that the Romans did, all this sort of historical stuff, right? Okay, Alexandria was the capital spiritually, and at least it seemed that she who had helped to free imprisoned Christendom would lead it to harmony and peace to its home at the feet of God. That hope was dashed too. An age of hatred and misery was approaching. The Christians, as soon as they had captured the machinery of the pagan state, turned it against one another, and the century resounds to a dispute between two dictatorial clergymen. Both were natives of Alexandria. Arius the Older, or Arius, took duty at St. Mark's, the vanished church by the sea at Chatby, where the evangelist was said to have been martyred. Learned and sincere, tall, simple in his dress, persuasive in his speech, he was accused by his enemies of looking like a snake and of seducing, in the theological sense, 700 virgins. Athanasius, his opponent, first appears as a merry little boy playing with other children on the beach below St. Theonas, on the shore of the present Western Harbour. That is to say, he was playing at baptism, which, not being in orders, he had no right to do, and the patriarch, who happened to be looking out at the palace window, tried to stop him. No one ever succeeded in stopping Saint Athanasius. He baptized his playmates, and the patriarch, struck by his precocity, recognized the sacrament as valid and engaged the active young theologian as his secretary. Physically, Athanasius was blackish and small, but strong and extremely graceful. That probably means he's dark in hue, doesn't necessarily mean he's black. One recognises a modern street type. His character can scarcely be discerned through the dust of the century, etc., etc. Okay. Constantine, still obsessed with hopes of toleration, asked, we start up here. The dispute Arius started, any disputes he started it, concerning the nature of Christ. Maybe he's into the hypothesis thing. Is it hypothesis? Hypothesis, something like that, where Christ is of two natures, both divine and man. Is Nestorius uttered, and he was given crap by Cyril, who wanted to be the bishop of bishops but knew that Nestorius would be, so he made up all these lies and then ended up being called a heretic through him, etc. The dispute Arius started concerning the nature of Christ. Its doctrinal import is discussed below, page 80. Here we are only dealing with the outward results. Constantine, who was no theologian and dubiously Christian, he's a pagan. He's a pagan, right? He's a pseudo-Christian. Was appalled by the schism which rapidly divided his empire. He wrote Counselling Charity, and where he was ignored, summoned the disputants to Nicaea on the Black Sea, 325. 250 bishops and many priests attended, and amid great violence the Nicene Creed was passed. So arguing and beating each other up over it. No, I should say this. No, this should be left out of the canon, all this sort of stuff. And Arius condemned. Yeah, they were smacking him around while he was actually attending it, apparently, punching him, attacking him. Athanasius, who was still only a deacon, returned in triumph to Alexandria, and soon afterwards became patriarch there. But his troubles were only beginning. Constantine, still obsessed with hopes of toleration, asked him to receive Arius back, and that's why, because they were arguing for each other, punching each other over, he decreed Christianity the state religion. Okay, so Constantine asked for Arius back. He refused and was banished himself. He was banished 5 times in all, once by the Orthodox Constantine, 335, twice by the Arian Constantinus, 338 and 356, once by the pagan Julian, 362, and once, shortly before his death, by the Arian Valens. Sometimes he hid in the Libyan desert, sometimes he escaped through Rome or Palestine and made Christendom ring with his grievances. Twice he came near to death in church, once in the Caesareum, where he marched professionally out of one door as the enemy came in at the other, and once in St. Theonis at night, where he escaped from the altar just before the Arian soldiers attacked him there. He always returned, and he had the supreme joy of outliving Arius, who fell down dead one evening while walking through Alexandria with a friend. To us, living in a secular age, such triumphs appear remote, and it seems better to die young, like Alexander the Great, than to drag out this arid theological odyssey. But Athanasius has the immortality that he would have desired. Owing to his efforts, the Church has accepted as final his opinion on the nature of Christ, the hypostasis, and duly grateful has recognised him as a doctor and canonised him as a saint. Only they can do that, make somebody a saint. Okay. In Alexandria, a large church was built to commemorate his name. It stood on the north side of the Canopic Street. The Attis Mosque occupies part of its site today. And it's a rule of the monks, and we are going to jump to page 79 to see what that has there about Serapis Christus. page. The characteristic of early Orthodox was a belief in Christ as a link between God and man, a humanizing belief. The work of the Greek scholars who had subtilized and universalized the simpler faith of Palestine. It had imparted into it doctrines taught by paganism. So it was a pagan mix, right? Pseudo-Christianity. We must now watch it harden and transform. Several causes transformed it. For example, the growth of an ignorant monasticism in Egypt, the growth in Northern Africa of a gloomier type of Christianity under Tertullian, and the general spirit of aggression, the new religion everywhere displayed as soon as Constantine labelled it as official, i.e. the supposed Christians going to temples of Diana, smashing the idols, all that sort of stuff, burning, looting, whatever. And the general spirit of aggression, the new religion everywhere displayed as soon as Constantine labelled it as official. He decreed it a religion. Christianity was the official religion, and they weren't to be persecuted or that sort of stuff anymore. But there was one cause, it was all legal, but there was one cause that was inherent in the belief itself, and that alone concerns us here in this book, within this book, on this page. Christ was the Son of God, all agreed, but what was the nature of Christ, or hypostasis? The subtle Alexandrian intellect asked this question about the year 300, and the Arian heresy was the result. It asked it again about 400 and produced the Monophysite heresy, and a third query about 600 produced a third heresy, the Monotheliite. Let us glance at these three in return. Heresies to others, they were of course orthodox in their own eyes. Each believes itself the only interpreter of the link that binds God to man. Yeah, because later on the story has got crap, as we said, from Cyril, a debate, because he started getting jealous and started lying and called him a heretic. They eventually became heretics, and in the Apostolic Church, or at least the original ancient Apostolic Church of the East, were labelled erroneously Nestorians, because they said, yeah, what he said about Christ having two natures, the hypostasis, there's both God and God divine and man. We've been saying that thousands of years prior to what he said. So they were called heretics and got all this persecution, possibly through Constantine. So they ran. He destroyed or somebody destroyed their church in the 13th century, and they kept running with all their manuscripts, the Old Testament, etc., and possibly the Galilean Aramaic New Testament scriptures given them by St. Thomas, who possibly founded that original church. And they kept running. They accepted it in China and different places until the new caliphs of Mohammedism or Islam became popular, and then they faced continual persecution, supposedly up to this very day in Syria, because of that, their belief in the Christ, etc. So here it has uncanonical Gospels, appendix page 235, Arianism, and it talks about that. Christ is the Son of God, then is he not younger than God? Arius held that he was, and that there was a period before time began when the first person of the Trinity existed and the second did not. Yeah, well, he's saying, like the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons, whoever, that he was created, when we can clearly show through the original ancient time of Exodus footnotes that he was God, that he is God, that he's the uncreated creator, the one to come, the one that was coming. Right? The Multa, the Aramaic, ancient Aramaic, or the manifestation in the nearest English equivalent, because there is no actual word for Multa in the English, right? That which wasn't revealed, but was to be revealed. It was revealed. He was revealed when he became God incarnate, God in flesh, and came to earth and dwelt amongst his own peoples, and had these 12 disciples and did his ministry and so forth. Arius held that he was, and that there was a period before time began when the first person of the Trinity existed and the second did not. In other words, the the Son of God didn't exist, God created him. A typical Alexandrian theologian occupied with the favourite problem of linking human and divine, Arius thought to solve the problem by making the link predominantly human. He did not deny the Godhead of Christ, but he did make him inferior to the Father, of like substance, not of the same substance, which was the view held by Athanasius and stamped as orthodox by the Council of Nicaea. Moreover, the Arian Christ, like the Gnostic demiurge, made the world creation as inferior activity, being entrusted to him by the Father, who had himself created nothing but Christ. It is easy to see why Arianism became popular, and so forth. And then you had the monophysitism, single nature. Christ is the Son of God, but also the Son of Mary. Then has he two natures or one? The monophysites said one. They did not deny Christ's incarnation, but they asserted that the divine in him had quite absorbed the human. The question was first raised in clerical circles in Constantinople, but Alexandria took it up hotly, and single nature became the national cry of Egypt, and so forth. Monothelism, single will. As the minds of the Alexandrians decayed, their heresies became more and more technical. Arianism enshrines a real problem which the layman as well as the cleric can apprehend. Monophysitism is more remote, and monotheism is difficult to state in the language of theology, and almost impossible to state in the language of common sense. Perhaps it bears in the signs of carelessness, for as we have seen, look on page 59, it was the invention of the Emperor Heraclius in the last desperate days when he was trying to conciliate Egypt, trying to make amends, link the two together so they're in agreement and all that sort of stuff, get on the good side. If Christ has one nature, he has of course one will, but suppose he has two natures, how many wills has he then? The monothelites said one. The orthodox view, the one we hold, is two, one human, the other divine, but both operating in unison as one, right? Three as one, triune. Obscure indeed is the problem, and we can believe that the Alexandrians, against whom the Arabs were then marching, did not understand monotheism when it was hurriedly explained to them by a preoccupied general. But it was not without a future. It failed as a compromise, but survived as a heresy, and long after the imperial government had disowned it and Egypt had fallen to Islam, it was cherished in the uplands of Syria by the Maronite Church. Maronite Church, paragraph 153 and 229. Conclusion: Islam. We have now seen Alexandria handle one after the other the system that entered her walls. The ancient religion of the Hebrews, the philosophy of Plato, the new faith out of Galilee, taking each in turn, she has left her impress upon them and extracted some answers to the question, how can the human be linked to the divine? In other words, how can Christ be both God, divine and human? It may be argued that this question must be asked by all who have the religious sense, and that there is nothing specifically Alexandrian about it. But no, it need not be asked. It was never asked by Islam, by the faith that swept the city physically and spiritually, talking about Egypt, into the sea. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the prophet of God. That's what they even say today, says Islam, proclaiming the needlessness of a mediator, or an in-between, like Christ, between God and man. The man Muhammad has been chosen to tell us what God is like and what he wishes, and there all machinery ends, leaving us to face our Creator. We face him as a God of power, who may temper his justice with mercy, but who does not stoop to the weakness of love. And we are well content that being powerful, he shall be far away. That old dilemma, that God ought at the same time to be far away and close at hand, cannot occur to an Orthodox Mohammedan or Islam. It occurs, or Muslim, it occurs to those who require God to be loving as well as powerful, to Christianity and to its kindred growths, and it is the weakness and the strength of Alexandria to have solved it by the conception of a link. Her weakness because she had always to be shifting the link up and down,